Kinshade Stories community, I'm glad you're here. What I'm about to share has kept me up at night. She walked into my office carrying a manila envelope. That's not unusual. Patients bring things sometimes: old letters, bank statements, photographs. But the way she held it told me something was different. She wasn't clutching it for support. She was holding it away from her body, like it was something she didn't want to touch but couldn't put down. She sat across from me, set it on her lap, and looked at me with eyes that weren't wet yet, but were about to be. Then she said, "I need you to tell me if I'm crazy, because if what I found out is true, then the last 14 years of my life did not happen the way I thought they did." I asked her what she meant. She opened the envelope and slid a single photograph across the coffee table between us. I looked at it. It was a picture of a man. He was standing on a sidewalk somewhere, holding a coffee cup, wearing a jacket I'd seen in other photos. He was smiling. He looked completely ordinary. She tapped the photograph with one finger and said, "That's not my husband." I looked at her. I looked at the photograph again. I said, "Priya, that's the man you've been married to for 12 years. She shook her head slowly. She said, "No, that's the man who has been pretending to be him." Before we go any further, I want to say something I say to everyone who comes to this channel. The stories I share are real, deeply real, but they represent individual human experiences. They are not universal blueprints. Relationships are complicated, and context matters in ways that a single story can never fully capture. If something in what you're about to hear resonates with your own life in a painful way, please don't sit with that alone. Reach out to a licensed professional. That's what we're here for. Now, let me tell you about Priya. Priya was 41 years old when she first came to see me. She was originally from the Nashville area, had grown up here, and had never left except for college. She worked as a pharmaceutical compliance auditor, which, when you hear the rest of this story, will take on its own particular weight. She was meticulous, organized, detail-oriented by nature and training. She was the kind of person who noticed things, or so she believed. She came to me not because of a crisis. She came because she'd been having what she described as low-grade anxiety for about 6 months. Trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating, a general sense, as she put it, that something was slightly off, but nothing she could name. She'd been married to a man named David for 12 years. They had 2 children, a daughter who was 9 and a son who was 7. They owned a house. He worked in commercial real estate. They had a dog named Hank. They went to her parents' house every Thanksgiving. By every external measure, they had a normal life. And in those first few sessions, that's what she talked about: normal life, normal stress, the background hum of exhaustion. There was nothing in the clinical picture that alarmed me. I thought we were dealing with moderate generalized anxiety, possibly compounded by some unaddressed perfectionism. We started working on that. She was a good patient, engaged, honest, willing to sit with uncomfortable thoughts. I remember thinking she was the kind of person who would make real progress quickly. That was 4 months before she walked in with the envelope. The first crack appeared in our 7th session. She came in looking different. Not visibly upset, just slightly altered, the way a person looks when they've been thinking about something constantly for days, and it started to show around the edges. I asked her what was on her mind. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I ask you something strange?" I told her yes. She said, "Is it normal to feel like you don't know someone, even after years, and not be able to explain why?" I asked her who she was thinking about. She said, "David." I asked what had prompted that. She said it was something small. A few weeks ago, she had been going through some files in their home office, looking for a document related to their car insurance. She found the folder she was looking for, and while she was flipping through it, a paper slipped out. It was a photocopy of his driver's license from about 15 years ago, before they met. She almost put it back without looking at it, but something made her stop. She looked at the birth date, and the birth date was wrong. Not wrong by a lot, just by 3 years. She knew his birthday, June 14th. She had celebrated it 12 times, but the license showed a birth year that made him 3 years older than he had ever told her he was. She asked him about it. He laughed it off. He said it was a typo on an old license, that he'd had it corrected years before they met, that it was nothing. He showed her his current license. Current one had the right date. He seemed completely relaxed about it, and she told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was being paranoid. She apologized to him for bringing it up. He kissed her on the forehead. That was that. But she couldn't let it go. Not fully. She said, I know it sounds small, a birth date, but I've spent my whole career catching tiny inconsistencies in pharmaceutical documentation. When something doesn't line up, I notice, and once I notice, I can't unnotice. Over the next 2 sessions, more small things came up, details she had filed away and not examined. Early in their marriage, he had told her his parents were both dead, had died before they met. She had accepted that. She had never pressed for details because the topic clearly caused him pain, and she respected that. But she realized, sitting in my office one afternoon, that she had never seen a single photograph of his parents. Not one. She had never met anyone from his side of the family. There had always been explanations. A distant family, people he'd lost touch with, estrangements. She had accepted all of it. She said, I'm an auditor. I cross-reference everything at work. Why did I never cross-reference him? I want to be careful here about something. When a patient starts describing a pattern of small inconsistencies about a spouse, there are several possible explanations. Sometimes it reflects a real problem in the relationship. Sometimes it reflects the patient's own anxiety creating a narrative where there isn't one. I was holding both possibilities. I was not going to help her build a case against her husband. I was going to help her understand what she was feeling and why. I told her that what she was describing, this background unease, was worth paying attention to, not because it definitely meant something was wrong, but because her internal signals were clearly trying to tell her something. We talked about the difference between intuition and anxiety. She said, I know the difference. I've been an anxious person my whole life. This doesn't feel like that. This feels like information. Then she went home, and she started looking. She didn't tell me she was doing it. She came in 3 weeks later, and she was a different person. She sat down very carefully the way someone does when they're trying to hold themselves together through sheer physical stillness. She had the envelope. She put it on her lap, and that's when she showed me the photograph and said what I told you at the beginning. Here is what she had found. The man she married, the man she had lived with and slept beside and raised 2 children with for 12 years, had a name she did not know. His real name was not David. The name he had used with her, the identity he had built their life around, belonged to a real David, a man who had died in a single car accident in rural Kentucky about 16 years ago, at the age of 28, with almost no surviving family and minimal public records. Someone, her husband, had found that gap and stepped into it. He had taken that name, that birth date, that social security number. He had built a life using the identity of a man who no longer existed to contradict him. She had found this because she found a name, a single name, written in pen on the back of a business card that had been tucked under the lining of an old briefcase she pulled out of their storage closet while reorganizing. The name on the back wasn't David's. She Googled it, and what came back was enough to make her feel the floor drop out from under her. She sat in my office, and she said, He has children, not with me. I found a woman in another state. She posted a birthday photo for her son. My husband was tagged in it. He was standing there smiling. The little boy looks just like our son. She stopped. She looked at her hands. She said, I don't know his name. I've been married to him for 12 years, and I don't know his actual name. I have been a therapist for a long time. I've heard things in this office that most people never hear in a lifetime. But I remember sitting across from Priya and feeling the weight of what she was carrying. Not just the betrayal, not just the fear about what this meant legally, financially for her children, but the specific cruelty of this particular thing, that the grief she was experiencing was not just about losing a marriage. It was about losing the very ground of reality. Every memory she had was now unreliable. Every document in her life potentially tainted. The person she thought she knew had never existed, and the person who actually existed, she didn't know who he was. She wasn't crying. She said, I keep waiting to cry, and I can't. Is that wrong? I told her no.
I told her that sometimes the nervous system encounters something too large to process all at once, and it protects you by going quiet. It's not denial, it's not strength, it's the mind's way of keeping you functional while it tries to catch up to what just happened. She asked me what she should do. I told her that before we talked about any of that, I needed her to know that what she was feeling, this numbness, the unreality, the inability to connect with her own emotions, was a completely normal response to an abnormal situation. I didn't want her to be frightened by her own flatness. Then I asked her, did he know that she knew? She said no. She had come here first. I told her that was a significant decision and I wanted to understand it. She said, I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind before I said a word to him, because if I'm wrong about this, if I somehow got all of this wrong, I need to know that before I blow up everything. I told her she wasn't wrong. The evidence she described was not ambiguous, and I told her gently but clearly that given what she now knew, she needed to speak to an attorney.
She spoke to him, not to be combative, but to protect herself and her children, because she did not know who she was actually married to, and that had legal and financial implications that she needed to understand before she made any moves. She nodded. She was very calm. She said, "He's going to lie. I know he's going to have an explanation for everything. He always does. He's the most convincing person I've ever met." She paused. That's the part I keep coming back to. He's been doing this for over a decade, and I never once had a real reason to doubt him. What does that say about me? And that right there is what I spent the following weeks working through with her. I explained to Priya that what she was experiencing, that searing self-questioning, is one of the most common and most painful responses to this kind of discovery. When someone close to us is revealed to have been systematically deceptive, our first instinct is often to turn that confusion inward. We ask ourselves why we didn't see it. We treat our own trust as a failure of intelligence or judgment. I had to help her understand that this is not how deception works. People who construct false identities are not just lying. They are skilled at something specific. They are expert at presenting a version of themselves that is consistent, warm, and believable. They have often been practicing for years before you ever meet them. Priya's trust was not a weakness. It was a completely reasonable response to a carefully engineered presentation. We talked about what psychologists call the consistency heuristic, the tendency to trust people who behave consistently over time. Her husband had been consistent for 12 years. That wasn't her naivete. That was him being very, very good at what he was doing. We also talked about something that doesn't get discussed enough in situations like this: anticipatory grief. She wasn't just grieving a marriage, she was grieving a version of her life that she now had to reclassify as something she didn't fully understand. Every good memory she had experienced in that house was real. It had happened, it had been felt, but the context was now different. I reminded her that her feelings had been real, even if his identity wasn't. Her love had been real, her children were real, her life was real. He had lived inside a lie. She had lived inside her actual life. Those are not the same thing. We talked about attachment patterns, specifically about how people who are highly trusting and deeply loyal often form very strong attachments precisely because they are not guarded. Priya described her own childhood as stable and loving. She had no reason to be suspicious of intimacy. She had been given no reason to build walls. I reminded her that being open to love is not a character defect, and that being exploited by someone who targeted that openness was not her fault. Over time, she spoke to an attorney. Legal proceedings were set in motion. It was complicated, deeply, exhaustingly complicated, in ways I won't detail here. The children had to be protected. She had to be protected. There were financial accounts to trace, documents to verify, questions about what was legally valid and what wasn't. I supported her through all of it from an emotional standpoint. The last time I saw her, she sat down and said something I think about often. She said, "The hardest part isn't the anger. I expected the anger. The hardest part is that he was a good father, and I don't know what to do with that."
I told her that she didn't have to do anything with it yet, that holding two true things at once, that someone genuinely hurt you and also had real moments of goodness, is one of the most difficult tasks in human psychology. It's called ambivalence, and it doesn't resolve quickly, but it does, over time, resolve. She was getting there, slowly, 1 week at a time. If this story is sitting with you right now, and I suspect it is, I want to ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the idea of questioning them felt almost disrespectful? And looking back, was that trust earned, or was it something you gave because you wanted it to be true? I ask because so many of us confuse loyalty with blindness, and so many of us have had to learn the hard way that love doesn't require us to stop seeing clearly. If you've been through something that cracked your sense of reality, a betrayal, a secret, a person who turned out to be someone else entirely, I'd really like to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me what helped you. Tell me what didn't. If this story reached you, please give it a like. It tells me these conversations matter to you. And if you want to hear more cases from this office, subscribe to Kinshade Stories. There's always another one. There's always someone working through something that might feel a lot like yours.